go from the idea of teaching like an hour. Let me make sure. George, can you make sure everybody has one of these right here? Because you'll need those. So if you don't have one of these, just raise your hand and we'll get you one. And what's that?
I'll use my reference.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll go through some stuff. And in what you're going to experience today, in terms of the basic rundown, is from here until 10:15, we'll be looking at disciple making. And then from 10:30 to 11:45, you'll be looking at church administration. And then we'll have lunch, and you've got options for lunch. And we can just make a decision from there and go from there. So then Jim Wilson will be leading the preaching side of things, 1:15 to 2:45, and then the last session will be JT Reed, and he'll be doing the pastoral ministry. And so when I started actually teaching classes, I did it through Advance, or at the time CLD, and I was a director of missions outside of Chicago. And I knew that we needed to train leaders. I just didn't really know what was available to do that. And I didn't really feel like I could create a new will, because if you're doing something in depth, if you can find a good foundation, it's great to do that. And so we started this, and long story short, our association moved from 32 churches, 6 or 7 pastoralists, to 40 churches in that 8 years, and we started 5 churches in 3 years. And we did that, and every church that we worked with was strengthened. And I'm talking about like real numbers, like our baptisms when I went were, as an association, were right around 100. We got them up to 300 every year and sustained that for 6 years. And so there was some significant things that happened just overall there. But what I learned about it is that you need some consistent way to develop and screen. I'm not sure if screen is the right word, but to really screen who you're going to put in leadership positions. And before I got into this, I was having maybe an hour lunch meeting with someone, and then trying to make a decision whether I was going to invest tens of thousands of dollars in this endeavor, this person. And it's hard to get that right because anybody can be good for an hour, And so how do you actually get into this place where you can sow in some of the things that God has sown into you too? So it's not just about them being a good person, but they need to know some things. They need to know some things that some things that you've learned, and how are you going to sow that in if you're not in that place to do that? And so we started this school, and it really became a great avenue for us to create leaders, and it was good. So I'll share that with you just from my perspective. And but the first side of this is we want to deal with disciple making, because disciple making is core to any ministry that we do. It doesn't matter if it's a children's ministry or a youth ministry or a choir ministry. Disciple making is a part of any ministry that we do. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. If you want to, you can break out your syllabus on this, and it will be, I think, CLE 2371, Making Disciples. And so all of these documents that I'm going to share with you today are going to be on a website on Google Docs where you can actually download them. And so I want to go through and show you basically how to set up a 15-week semester and teach this. I'm not going to go through all the information. I'm going to show you how to set it up, because that's a big portion of the battle. How do you actually do it? Because doing a 1-hour teaching time is a lot different than doing a 3-hour teaching time. You just got to do a whole lot more, for sure. So, but you can go on to Google Docs and download this, and then you can personalize it to your center or your area. Do you have one of these? Everybody with me? All right. And so basically, you know, it talks about the time frame. This particular syllabus is set up so that it's for 15 weeks. But in advance, you can change that time. So say your classes meet from 10 weeks. You can just adjust the time. The main thing is that you need to cover the information, because the people need to know what you need to share. And so you want to make sure that you cover the information, whether you do that in a weekend or an intensive. Like I went to Haiti this year and taught disciple making, and I did it in a 7-day intensive. And so you can do it in different formats. So I'm going to share with you a 15-week look at it, but I don't want you to say, oh, I'm locked in, I've got to do this for 15 weeks. In advance, it's really contextualized. So for example, Jason, if you're doing this in Italy, you've got to contextualize it to your area, you know, because in Wyoming, for example, we have a center, and sometimes they can't drive to class, so they have to use the video conferencing to do that. We have one of our centers that does overseas work, and they do it in intensives. And he does it in 3 different areas over there, and he just takes an extended time to do it. So there's some flexibility there. Let's look at the course description. I'm going to kind of click through here. And the course description, this course explores the process of spiritual development as well as methods of discipleship practice in the church. Students will examine the biblical backgrounds of discipleship and the role of spiritual disciplines, community development, spiritual gifts, and accountability in spiritual growth. And then basically what we look at here is that you got the course description and you got the learning outcomes, what you're wanting to achieve. And when I look at this, I may think, you know, there's some things I want to add to this, and you are welcome to do it. You are welcome to add to this. And so some of the things I'm going to share with you today about what I actually do is some of those are going to be certainly in addition to this, but I think very necessary. So the idea of the course outcomes, students will demonstrate understanding of biblical mandate and models for discipleship. Students will be able to articulate how people grow in the faith and practice in Christian life. Students will be able to apply and development of spiritual disciplines to the life of a believer. And the students will demonstrate their ability to plan and design church practice for the development of discipleship. And the students will be able to practice everyday relational disciple-making skills. And so that, when I look at disciple-making as a whole, you got two facets from my point of view and what you'll cover in this course. One is, how do you make disciples? How do you operate daily to get this done? And then, how are you going to set up an organization like a church to do it? So it'll be hard to give what you don't have. If you're not doing it, it'll be really hard to give that away to somebody else because you don't know. So we're going to cover both of those. And the basic components of the syllabus are the course components. I'm not going to spend time reading through this. You got your textbooks, and we're going to look at 2 today. Discipleship Uncomplicated, which is a book that I wrote on disciple making, and then Jim Putman's book, Real Life Discipleship, which gives you a look at how do you do this in a church. Many of you who are already doing this, my encouragement to you, because I look at you guys for sure, is that if you don't have a book on this and what you've done, you probably ought to start. And this can be like a jumping off point for you to do that. But you're already getting it done in your area, and that's it. That's super valuable. Yeah. Then this culminates in a church discipleship plan. So when a student is done, when the pastoral leaders, shepherding leaders are done with this, they need to have a plan in writing that they're going to begin to execute for their area of ministry. So when you're teaching this course, you're going to have you may have strictly what we would say the traditional pastor role. You know, that these people are looking at pastoring, being the lead pastor in a church or situation. And then some of them are not. Some of them are going to be shepherding inside the church that is already there. And so I was having this conversation the other day. You know, you have a children's worker, you know, a leader of a children's department. They're tasked to shepherding, you know, some of those parents and the children, certainly. And so to deny them training and shepherding would not be a great idea. You know, you got to train them and train them all and train as many who will come. And you'll be in a much better spot and you'll have a much stronger leadership base. So I wouldn't think about this idea of just pastoral ministry, get locked down on this is only for men, you know, who are looking at being a pastor, because we all need shepherding skills, you know, for sure. And when you think about this, even in the home, you know, a father needs to learn how to shepherd their family, and a mother will need to learn how to shepherd that as well. And we know that that's a joint effort. So I don't want to come across today thinking that that's the only paradigm that we're looking at. It is not. All right. And then you'll see the class schedule. This is where we're going to spend a lot of our time today, is just how do you set up a 15-week class schedule when you're looking at a couple of resources like we'll be looking at today. And so what you want to do is, one, get familiar with the resources themselves, and then break them down in manageable portions. And so that when they're done at the end of that journey, they're in a place to know what you want them to know and have had time to practice what you wanted them to practice. And so we'll be looking at the church schedule. So week one, I'm going to share with you how I set this up. Again, you have some flexibility in how you do this, but an introduction to discipleship uncomplicated. I may ask some questions like what's the difference between being a disciple and making disciples? So let's just talk about that just for a moment in this group. What is the difference, the foundational difference between being a disciple or making disciples? What are y'all's thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, one is the process. You know, one is first being a disciple. That's kind of who you are.
Okay.
The other one is the process of passing on who you are to someone else.
Okay, that's a great description. Yeah. Any other thoughts about that?
Productivity.
Being productive. Yeah. Yeah.
I think making disciples include the commitment.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And I could flesh those both out, pressed in there a little bit, a commitment to who or what. You know, there's when you dig down in that, there's going to be some specifics that you get to. And so, yeah.
I mean, being a disciple, you're taking in and learning. You're kind of a sponge, and making disciples, you're kind of being that sponge is being squeezed, and you're communicating or sharing or teaching what you've learned as a disciple.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You guys are right on. Yeah.
Yeah, I think being a disciple is try to imitate Christ and review that constantly, because we are in a society that's trying to influence us every single day, every single moment, and sometimes we don't realize that we are already on the other side, behaving like any other person and place to behave like a following of Jesus. So if the people see us as we imitate Christ, they're gonna decide that because it's something they're not supposed to find everywhere. A disciple of Christ is not, everywhere.
Right.
But if we are committed to Him and review that every time, that's make a change.
Yeah.
Because Christ changed our lives, and that produced trying to change lives.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. You know, when I began to really think about this and recognize, you know, if Jesus told us to go make disciples, which he did. I mean, you can read the last play that he sent into the team. This is the last play I'm giving you. Go make disciples. When I really started thinking about that, I recognized that somewhere along the way there was a drift that happened. The drift was it's a small drift. I call it it's like the law of 2%. You know, if you have a target out here and you're 2 degrees off and you walk for 10 steps, you can easily say, oh, I'm off just a little bit, I'll just adjust, right? But if you have a target out here and you're journeying to that and you spend 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you don't even really know where the target is anymore. You can't even see it. And when you talk about, you know, if you were to ask the average Christian, you know, are you making disciples? They're going to say, probably not. They're not even really going to know what that means. You know, if you say, are you doing it? And then you say, tell me how you're doing it, then you're going to get all kinds of, you know, information. But this is what Jesus asked us to do. He said, go and make disciples. So there ought to be some clarity to that. I think every Christian ought to know what that means and what that looks like. If they don't, then we've not fulfilled the Great Commission. And, you know, the first part of that. And so we've got to pull people back in. Here's how I break down the difference on a practical, tangible level. You can be a disciple all by yourself. You can study, you can read, you can pray, you can worship. You can do all of that by yourself, but you can't make a disciple by yourself. Disciple making literally requires another human being. You know, when you do the simple math on this, I'm pretty simple about it. You do the simple math, it requires another person that you are intentionally trying to influence, encourage, strengthen, mold, shape, direct to become more like Jesus. And there's something about that as I am trying to help somebody else become more like Christ, that in itself makes me more in tune with that journey, you know, in tune with him. Because I know if I'm sharing with you, I need to be doing this, I better be doing it, right? And so, but when I break down the difference, that's how I break it down. I share that with you just to say that might be an example of what an introduction might look like, but you can flesh that out in many different ways. That's kind of how I deal with it in the book. And so in the first section, we deal with, I think, basically kind of what disciple making is, who's involved, those type of things. And then the basic breakdown and I will make sure that you guys have this PowerPoint, and it's general in nature, and I did it that way so that you could kind of plug and play, you know, and you can add to it. But basically, each section will have an introduction or a main title. And I think here I deal with the heart of disciple making, which is loving God and loving people. And that comes right out of Matthew chapter 22, which is has been a profound verse for me. It was one of those verses that, man, for years, I memorized it, I taught it, I preached it, you know, those type of things. But I don't know that I fully really got it. And somewhere along the way, God just helped me to see what I was missing. And when I read the text, it was the last part that really settled into my heart. He said, the first and greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. He said, and the second is linked to it. It's likened to it. It's inseparable from it. It's to love your neighbor as yourself. And the implication there is no life that says, I love Jesus, but I don't really care for people. If the love of Jesus Christ is poured into you, you're not going to be able to help but love people, because that's who he gave his life for. And if he's in you, you're going to be expending your life for them too. There's no way you can have Jesus without the other. I mean, he fills you with himself, and that's what he's about. And so, but then he says this. He says, all the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. You know, and you think about, well, you know, hanging on something, that's a pretty compromising situation, you know, right? I mean, that's what we kind of think about. But if loving God and loving people, if one of those fails, then it all falls. He said, and I mean, it's significant. It would be impossible to overstate the importance of what Jesus talked about there. Now, for me, this is what I call the heart of disciple making. The foundational truth that you love Jesus with all your heart and you love people too. You love people too. I remember my wife and I were reading through the scriptures together. We were reading through Deuteronomy, and I came across this passage that reminded me of something that's really important. What does God get out of the deal? We get a lot, right? We get a lot out of this deal, but what does he get out of it? And in Deuteronomy, you'll read these words, and the people are the Lord's portion. I'm like, wow, that is nuts. He gets us. That seems like a lame deal for him, right? Like, I know me, that's not that good of a deal. You know, so I spend some time really cultivating a heart of disciple making, because if you don't have a heart for it, it doesn't matter what you do. It just doesn't matter. It's not going to count. There's anything that you do here, you know, it's not going to count. And you won't be fulfilled either. You won't be able to enjoy that grind, you know, that you end up doing, because you'll be able to look like it's hard work now, but I see where this is going, and you're going to end in a good spot. And so I deal with that first part of loving God and loving people is really the heart of disciple making, and we'll spend some time going over that. I would do an introduction to that. And then I would do that's section Love God, Love People. That's the chapter in the book or the principle in the book that you would go over here. And then the next portion, there's 2 chapters. What's your name? This is interesting. When I'll ask this question: what's the first thing that you need to do in disciple making? What's the first step in the disciple making process? I remember I've talked with a number of people through the years, but often Christian people will say, you start discipleship at baptism. It's shocking how many pastors that I talk with that have that idea. You can't start discipling somebody until you actually start sharing, until they have officially accepted Jesus. And it's like there's a magical line that's where it starts, you know. But we know that's not the case, right? Where does discipleship start? When you know their name. Who decides on whether or not you're going to learn somebody's name? Who is that up to? And you begin to get a sense of God's empowerment. See, this is not somebody else's job, and it's not somebody else's special gift. It just, at the front end of that, begins with a little bit of effort. And I deal with people all the time. I talk about this like all over. And so I'm always confronted with the reality. People say, I'm terrible at remembering people's names. It's just awful. You know, you don't understand. You get older. You know, I've heard it all. And then this is my question. To all the people who say I'm not very good at this. What are you actually doing to work at remembering people's names right now? And then there's like, you know, it just goes on. Because here's the reality. People who are good at remembering people's names, they work at it. They'll do the mental associations. They'll write it down. You know, they'll do some work at actually trying to remember people's names. And the people who are bad at it, they don't do anything.
I remember when we first met here, and we kind of went through that exercise in a brief time. And you gave me actually some tools to help, because I'm pretty good at names. I worked in prisons, juvenile halls, all that for like 28 years, and knowing people's name is really important. You wouldn't think that, But when you can call somebody by their name, it's powerful. And even in pastoring, just knowing somebody's name. And so my friends are like, oh, you remember so many people's names. And so as my memory is not as strong, I have to put more effort into it. So I did some of the things that, like in my iPhone, when I meet somebody, I'll put an association. Oh, Little League Baseball, this is such and such's father. And those key little things that if I see them, the name doesn't come, I'll pull out my phone and start doing that effort. So you're absolutely right. It is different for people, different people.
Yeah.
But like you said, you shared a tool with me in the brief time that we met, and I've been using some of those things to help to remember people's names, and it is powerful.
Yeah. Thank you, James, for sharing that. One of the things that, and I'll share it with you why. Why does somebody's name, why is that so important? It's the only label that we attach to our personhood. Every other label is a descriptor, but it's not who we are. But when someone calls you by name, they're addressing you. And you'll find some interesting, and I practice this all the time, like when I go into the places that I frequent. I was in the bank yesterday, and there's Darlene. I met Darlene a long time ago. But every time I go in there, I'll say, she'll sit at her desk, and I'll say, hey, Darlene, how are you doing today? A lot of times, she'll beat me to it. And you'll watch person after person walk by her desk while you're in line. And what differentiates you from everybody else? And who actually decides that? And this is the empowerment that you really want to lead people with, is that Jesus has empowered you to make disciples. He's given you all the authority that you need and all the things that you need to get this done. And everybody that we're talking to, they need to understand that you don't have to wait, to get it. You've already got it. You just need to exercise it. And here's how you get going in that. So, yeah.
Hey, Warren, I just had a neat story. I met this summer an elderly lady named Martha up in Eureka, and she does street evangelism, but she has this name book, and she reaches all these young kids, but she goes up and she says, hey, do you know the meaning of your name? And that's the intro. No, I know. She says, hey, let me look up your name. And then she'll look up their name, and then and in this book, there's like the definition of the name, but then a Bible verse. And in the Bible, there's a verse that says this, and that opens the door. And then she shares Christ with them.
Isn't that awesome?
This amazing lady, I thought, what a great way to, hey, has anybody ever told you the meaning of your name?
Yeah.
No, well, hey, let me look it up in this book. And she shows them, and, oh, look what the Bible says here. And then that's her intro. And I just thought, what a cool, this lady was amazing.
Yeah, that is cool. There's so many ways to get this done, and get it done uniquely like God made you. There's not a cookie cutter process. I think there's principles for us to follow, but there's nothing you guys are all getting it done in different ways, and that's okay. That's great. It's going to take all of us doing those things in different ways to get all this stuff done. And you want to hopefully, share some tools that are actually helpful in the process. Getting to know somebody by name, you'll get this out. And I'll also share this with you too. And here is where you need to help unpack, how do you create a reach list of the people that you're most likely to influence for Christ? When I was pastoring, I remember ordering like these lists from, I don't know if it's Lifeway or something, but it was like new home owners and all those types of who's moving into the community. We try to do everything. Everything I could think of, we try to do it. But there are two driving principles about coming to faith in Jesus. Two driving principles. And one of them is proximity. The people who come to Christ do so, 8 out of 10, 80%, you've heard this for years, come to Christ because of the encouragement or influence of a family member, friend, coworker, neighbor, or acquaintance. What do all of those have in common? Proximity. These are the people closest to them. And I mean physically closest to them. that they're there. So proximity, we are most likely to influence the people we're closest to. So if you go to the same stores, if you go to the same places, which we all are creatures of habit, we are going to do this. Here's an exercise that you can give. This week, I want you to just make a note of the places that you go every day. Because they're not aware of the opportunities most of the time. They go get gasoline at the same stores, and they go, get coffee at the same places. They go to lunch at the same places. They frequent the same stuff, and they do it over and over again. We all do it. Where are those places? And then the question is, who is there that I need to know? And then you start breaking it down for them so that now they're in a place where they can actually start becoming more aware that, hey, you know what? These opportunities are all around me, and I don't even have to break stride to do it. I just need to do what I do wherever I go. And then you're getting more into what this whole idea of disciple making is all about. It's as you go, and that's what the scripture talks about. Jesus modeled as he went. And you'll see these as he was walking by the seashore, or as he entered this city, or as he did this. Those moments need to unfold as we live, and that ought to be true in every Christian's life. No exception to that. Man, you'll never guess what happened to me today. That ought to happen every day. There ought to be a moment like that comes about. It's like you meeting this lady. You might have been going to this event or doing this, but along the way, wow, this is a great thing. I'm going to use this. I just happened to meet this guy close by the elevator, kind of thing. And then off and running, you never know. You need those moments, but you also need to know that you can create the moments. As a disciple maker, you can create those moments. That's what this lady did that Paul was sharing with us about earlier, is she got a book, a simple tool, and she found a way to create the moment. That's what disciple makers do. They don't wait, passively hoping it's going to work out. They are going for it. And to instill that type of mentality in the people that are around us, I think is really important to do. And so, here's an easy way to start thinking about a reach list and helping a person make a reach list, is to ask this question: who in your family, just write down their first name. Who in your family right now is currently not following Jesus, or you have no idea where they are spiritually? Write their first name down. And it takes, just a few seconds really, and you'll have 4, 5, 6, 7 names. And then you say, okay, how about people that you work with, every day? Who do you currently work with every day that are not following Jesus, or you have no idea where they are spiritually? Write their first name down. And you can go through the acquaintances, you can go through the neighbors. Most people don't know their neighbors. They literally don't know who lives next door to them. And but who changes that? Who decides to change that? We do as the disciple makers. But I share that with you to say, okay, if we're a group, say, of 10, a little bit more than that for sure, but just for round numbers, and each one of you put down a list of 5 names, you just specifically identified the 50 people that you're 80% likely to reach. If you can help a congregation as a director of missions, I wish I would have known a lot of what I'm sharing today, because I can literally go into any church and I can help them identify by name the people that they're most likely to influence for Christ. You can't buy a list like that, but you can help build that list. And then what you do from here, you cultivate that heart, you get to know their name, and then we start moving into the spiritual side of this. I think it's all spiritual for sure. I think sometimes just remembering somebody's name is an act of kindness in so many ways, and it's a good thing. I was with my wife and I were out. I'll share the story here in a little bit. Okay, so the basic, and then you'll do assignments, introduction and principles to discipleship, principles 1 and 2. So the way that I lay this out is I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to give you a good stirring time together. Then you're going to read it, and then you're going to complete a challenge. At the end of starting with the second, getting to know your name, there's a challenge at the end of every one of these. You've got to actually do it. And so the challenge is create your own reach list and then teach one other person how to create a reach list. If the Great Commission is to teach them to observe everything I have commanded you, then discipleship's not complete until you are teaching someone else to do what you do. And so that's why the idea of being, we often focus on our own spiritual formation at the detriment of actually helping somebody else grow. But as we help other people grow, we're in a better spot because we have to be ahead of them in order to do that. And so in each one of those challenges, there is going to be consistently adding somebody to your reach list. There's going to be completing the initial challenge that you just read, and then teaching someone else how to do it. Because that is what is in line with what we read in the Great Commission. So we move on to the next one. You're going to review principles. You're going to review the principles 1 and 2, kind of go back over, make sure there's any questions, see if anybody has any insights about what they learned, because every time I'm in a group, I learn something new about how to do something that I didn't know, and it's pretty awesome. And you'll experience the same thing because God's given them so many insights along the way. So you'll review the principle, and that's important. You can do it with a quiz. You know, that's how I would probably do it. I'm going to give you a 10-question quiz. The reason that I do it that way is that also becomes the midterm and also becomes the final. And you just keep reviewing that so that they're ready to go when that gets there. And then, so the way that the second session, you start reviewing 1 and 2, and then we introduce to Let's Pray. In this section, I deal with taking the people on your reach list and start praying for them by name. And there's some practical tips about how to do that. So, for example, if Vern were on my list, I would pray for Vern, and I teach a principle or a kind of a pattern called the 3 Ps. You pray that they'll personally come to know Jesus, that God will provide for them, and on blank here, the protection. And this really comes out of Matthew 17. Now, in going through this, I'll go through the passages, but in it's John 17, where Jesus is praying with his disciples, John 17. And so he goes through there, and in maybe around verse 11, he says this. He says, I'm not praying for the world. I'm praying for those you gave me. Now, this is where you begin to help that person begin to identify that there's more to this experience of prayer than just praying for everybody. I'm going to pray for everybody, but I'm going to pray specifically for these. My family members that aren't walking with you, my coworkers who don't know you, my neighbors who I have no idea where they are. I'm going to start praying for them by name every day. And there's something about when you start praying for someone by name that God starts bubbling up that compassion for them. It's hard to walk by them without addressing them if you've been praying for them, because he just kind of he tunes you in to those opportunities. You begin to recognize, hey, I'm not just happening by you. You know, there's an opportunity, and it's surprising also to see that they themselves on the other side of that will initiate conversations and opportunities that they didn't know that you were praying for them. And it becomes really cool for you to have an insider's track on what God's doing in their life. And it is really, really neat. But this is really the first thing that we can do spiritually to start moving that needle, changing our hearts and changing how we interact with the people around us. But Jesus prays twice for protection in that passage. And I thought that was interesting because before that, I really wasn't praying much for protection for somebody. I was praying for other things, but I thought, you know what, I want to pray for people like Jesus prayed for his disciples. And so I started praying that God would protect you. And he prays generally, he said, protect them and then protect them from the evil one in that passage. And so I started praying that. And then I recognized that we just need God's provision, every day. And so I started praying for, God's provision on people. And then that they would personally come to know Jesus. And that's in John 17:3, where he says, this is eternal life, that you may know the one true God and his son, Jesus Christ, that they would know him. And that word know is one of heart knowledge. It's personal. And so I just started praying the 3 Ps, that God would protect them, provide for them, give them wisdom, and that they would personally come to know Jesus. And I'll give you there's ways to do this. Say, I'm an advocate for not just praying for somebody, but also praying with someone. I think there's a spiritual dynamic that takes a little bit of courage to actually start doing this, but you begin to experience God in ways as you press into those moments that you can't do without it. And so I've prayed with people literally all over the place. And I'm thinking about a way I'll share with you that you can share with others is that you can do this personally, verbally, or you can do it in a note. I met a owner of an Outback steakhouse. His name was John. And God put him on my heart, and I started praying for him. And I'm like, I don't know what to do for him. I don't know how to do this. And then God gave me an idea. So I went and got a coffee card, put some money on it, and then I wrote this card. And I said, he revealed something in our conversation that was also key. He said, when people come in and they ask for the owner here, I'm guaranteed of one thing: they want something. And I never really thought about that from an owner's perspective. But that's not just true with John. That's true with anybody who owns a business. That when they're there, they're wanting something, and usually it's for free, right? And so I wrote on that card, I said, John, I said, I know when someone asks for the owner that they want something. But today I want to give you something. Have a cup of coffee or hot chocolate on me. And also want to let you know that I'm personally praying that God will protect you and that God will provide for you and give you wisdom, and that you will personally come to know Jesus. And I said, your friend, Warren. And I put that on a card, went to the Outback, 5 o'clock, opened the doors, encountered the lady there and said, where's the owner? And she's like, oh, he's back there, kind of thing. And turn it back. And so I just gave him a card and I said, John, you may not remember me, but we met the other day. And he said, oh yeah, there's this funny story that was shared there at the table. And I said, hey, I know that people want something when they come see you, but hey, I just want to give you this today. Hope it encourages you. And I left. And those 2 encounters with John were probably 5 minutes. They were not long. And then about 6 months later, I was preaching at a church not too far from there, and I was sharing this story to help introverts understand that disciple making is not just an extrovert activity. Jesus, when he said, go make disciples, he knew that you were an introvert, and he still expects you to do it. You don't get an out for that, right? You have to figure out how to do it in your skin and in your way. And I want to share with you a way that you can do this where you don't have to hardly say anything. You just give somebody a card. And so I shared that story, and a young lady came up afterwards and said, Brother Warren, you have no idea. I work at that Outback. I was like, no way. And she's like, yeah, way. And she said, John literally took that card and he shared it with every one of us employees. You have no idea what this meant to you. And I was like, you're absolutely right. I have no idea. But what I want to share with you is a way that you need to empower. You need to think about the students doing this in a way that God made them to do it. And don't give them outs. Don't let their personality traits or bents or any of that give them an out in this, because we don't have an out. And then, every time I share that story, it makes me love John more, it makes me love the whole situation more. And that's part of that heart development in that. God just does some really cool stuff with us. And so it begins with praying for somebody, and then a gift, a tangible gift of this is for you. And I stole this out of Matthew 5, where Jesus says that you're salt and light, which is an interesting, reality to face when you actually read it and take it in. And this is what he says. He says, you are the salt of the earth. That is not a suggestion. That is not an if-then statement. If you do this, then you will become. You know, it's not conditional. He is literally declaring, this is who you are. Own it. I mean, that's hard to own, you know, because he was like, what? I'm not nothing. No, nobody wants to accept that. We all feel like, what? And then he goes on to say, you're not only the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world. And they're like, what? And then he says, don't hide it. And then he reveals in that passage what being salt and light really is. He says, you know, let your good deeds be seen by men, so that by doing that, they may give glory to your Father in heaven. And so the good that you and I do, like with John, just giving him that simple note, the good that we do becomes salt and light so that people can taste and see that God is good. And light, you know, I thought about just doing this for John. But light, by its very nature, shines. If it's light, it's going to shine. And John shined that light in places and with people I've never met and could never meet. Light, by its very nature, shines. And it's through the good that we do, that good. And I have 2 rules that I go over in this material about doing good. It's genuinely got to be for them. No, we've heard that no strings attached stuff. And it really is that. You know, when you look at the scriptures, and I looked at every encounter that Jesus had with another person. And when you look at the encounters, and I asked 2 questions. What did he actually say? What did he literally do? What did he say and do? Whatever he said and did, I needed that to be in my life. But when he has encounters with somebody, how many of the people that Jesus did good for gave back to him? You're hard pressed to think of any. A lot of times he just sent them away. He did good for them and then said, get back, you know, get on with your life, you know, and go back home and tell them and do that. But he wasn't looking for contribution. He did good because he could do good. That's the only reason to do good. And this goes back to that love God, love people, heart, motive thing, because it'll be tested all throughout our life, you know, no doubt about it. And so, rule number 1, it's got to truly add value or benefit them, no strings attached. Rule number 2, it needs to honor the Father. Everything that Jesus did honored the Father. And those are 2 good rules to set into place. You know what? I want to do this so that you will be successful. And I want to do this because, Jesus, I love you. Man, that's a great heart. That falls right in line with loving God and loving people, which all of this should. All right, and this is for you. There's lots of different ways to give, tons of different opportunities for sure. And then you want to, the assignments, you want to, and again, this is just how I set it up. You read the principles, 3 and 4, and then you complete the challenges. Let's pray, and this is for you. And then there's specific challenges to do that. Okay. I don't know what time it is. All right. Any questions up to this point? Yeah.
When it comes to the challenges,
yeah,
I know the syllabus you said will be on Google Docs, but some of the content for the exercise and how to do that, would that also be available, or is that in the book?
All the exercises are in the book. So if you go, let's say, for example, if you go to page 20, page 20 is the first challenge. Make a reach list with a minimum of 5 names, and then teach one person how to create a reach list just like yours. When I looked at the Great Commission, I couldn't make an assignment if it were just for you. And I think that's part of our problem, you know, that part of the drift is we're just taking in. We're like a sponge. We're just taking in almost like everything that we do, and we're not immediately employing that in someone else's journey and helping them along the way. Let's go to, the last principle in 3, or the challenge. So, and you'll see the the progression here. And that's page 33, the challenge, add one name to your reach list, select a person on your reach list, and go and pray with them, or write them a prayer card and give it to them. Teach one other person how to pray the 3 Ps. And so then you're actually, then they'll have stories. I mean, you'll have some really cool stories when you really start saying, you got to do this. And you can coach them on, start where a lot of people are challenged with the idea of safety. They don't feel safe if they go out and pray for somebody they've never met. That's really daunting at the first end. Go and pray for your family member. Go and pray for somebody, that and who will love you no matter what. And you can start there. But get going, and then hey, I want to pray for you, and then I want to teach you. Here's what I'm doing, and then you start teaching them. We gotta teach people how to teach in those moments that unfold, with us, and that's where the challenges are. All of them are very simple. I ask basically 2 questions when I give an assignment: is it doable, and is it worth it? Can they actually pull off what I'm asking them to do? And then if they do it, will it hold water? Will it actually be worth it? And I've ran into lots of assignments. I've given lots of assignments that did neither of those. Yeah.
Like I said, I just started working with a church that's been in decline for several years. And they haven't had a prayer meeting for a couple of years on Wednesdays. And so I'm doing this very same thing with them, a prayer meeting on Wednesdays. And I'm taking 3x5 cards, and I'm asking them to I give them 2 cards. One is for a person that they know who is lost and that they can pray for them. And the second one is that they were to put their name on the second one and pray for spiritual growth in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next Wednesday, after I'd done this the first time, the next Wednesday, I had them give back to me in there how God was working with them on those 2 things. And it just enlivened the prayer meeting.
Yeah.
It really did, because they began to say, well, God does hear me, and God is working, and this is what he's doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we can't move any spiritual needle if we're not praying for
That's right.
people. It doesn't happen. This is spiritual work for sure. So absolutely right. Those are good questions, good insights for sure. Week 3, we're going to review the principles 3 and 4, and then introduce 5. And so, and they'll have there's a review, and let me share a story, and what's your story. And this is where I teach people how to share the gospel, where the gospel flows unhindered. And this took me a long time to learn, because I was one of those people that I went to every evangelism thing I could actually get a hold of, and I learned every presentation. And you were going through the Roman road and faith and share Jesus without fear and CWT, and I mean just all of them. EE, evangelism explosion, those type of things. All of them I've done, but I found nothing better than my story. And so the easy way in is, hey, tell me a little of your story. Now, when you do an introduction, and I always start with the other person, tell me a little bit about your story. Because at that moment, you've given them permission to share as much or as little as they want to share, they feel safe to share, they care to share. And then they control the content. I put no boundaries on any content. I give no directions in that. I just simply say, hey, tell me a little bit about your story, and do that because you're interested. If you're not interested, don't start. That goes back to the heart issue, and that's problematic. It really is. Our hearts they're a mess, and we're quick to get off pace. But if you're doing this because if it's an activity, then you're not where you need to be. But if you're saying, hey, I want to hear a little bit more about your story, and everybody's got a pretty amazing story, You know, everybody can do pretty neat things, you know. They're probably found something that they're fairly good at, you know, and they're passionate about. And so they get to share as little or as much about that as you want. And then you're going to listen for what I call snapshots. You're going to listen for snapshots or connectors. Now, as you're listening for those connectors, you're going to see that there's many connectors as they share their stories that you could just immediately connect with. Immediately have a snapshot picture about how you could do that. And you wait until they're done, and then you can, it's a kind of a free flow from there. And you can say, hey, you mentioned this, and what you're doing is connecting. And that in itself helps you connect relationally. That you had this experience, I have had a similar experience. You know, you're not trying to one-up anybody at this point, you're trying to make connections at this point. And so nothing does that like a story. And most cultures, by their nature, will start with a story anyway. I mean, most cultures start and they share in stories. Oh, let me tell you about what happened to me this weekend. And you're off and running. Well, when we're sharing our story, that ought to go in the same way as well. We're sharing our story and we're off and running. And then listening there. So you can share 4 types of stories. You can share God's story, which is the Bible. You can share your story, how you came to Christ. You can share biblical stories, and you can share life stories, and any combination therein. And then there's also some things that I would say that are really important. Why did Jesus, like if you go to Matthew 13, why did he share the same parables over and over again? And it's like the disciples are like, why are we hearing this again? You know, why is this happening? Why do you always speak in parables? I think is what it says. And so, but the reality of it is this was a common experience to them. This is, if you were hanging out with Jesus, you'd hear these stories over and over again. And so, but he shared them, a parable in itself is a kingdom truth wrapped in a story that has meaning that people can relate to. And there's something about a story that once you share it, it's hard to shake. You may forget a little bit about the person, but the story that comes in is a connector for them. And that becomes important. But for example, I'll share 2 stories. My story, my faith story, I'll share to communicate this truth. I believe Jesus, and so can you. Do you understand what truth you're trying to sow in? I share another story that God is real and he speaks to you. And then I close that with John 8:47. You know, there's a passage in the Bible that says, those who belong to God hear what God says. The reason that you do not hear is because you do not belong to God. And I just let the word do its work. And man, you can just see it. I mean, they're processing the fire out of that stuff, you know, as you go along here. And then you give an assignment. I'm going to kind of work through the rest of these. I'm going to go through, this one deals with how to give personal invitations, and it's probably not what you initially think. There's nuances to how to do this and to how to do it well. But if you teach people how to give a personal invitation like Jesus did, then it becomes powerful. And I'll share that the weight of a personal invitation is not the event, it is the relationship. If I say, hey, I want you to come to this event at church with me, they're weighing the event against everything else they're doing in life. But if you say this, I want you to come with me this Sunday, what do you say? Now they're not weighing the event, they're weighing their relationship with you. And your relationship weighs more than any event. Even if they got 10 things going, it's going to be harder for them to look you in the eye and say, no, I just can't do that. Because the relationship weighs a lot. That's with me. Same type of principles. I'm going to show you how this lay this out. This deals with spatial dynamics and how space affects disciple making, which a lot of people don't even consider. But it is absolutely true. As a matter of fact, it is a reality of what we do. So in gathering people, there's 4 types of spaces. You have intimate space, personal space, social space, and public space. They all have different purposes. Like a lot of people will say, well, discipleship only happens one-on-one, or discipleship only happens in a small group. That's not true. Discipleship happens in all 4 spaces. It just happens differently. You know, it happens differently. And you need to understand You need to know what purpose that space fills so that you can actually maximize your disciple-making time. So what's important in a Sunday morning is they have an incredible experience, you know, worthy of sharing with their family when they leave, you know. That's what the crowds gathered. They went back and talked about, man, the healing or the teaching, or man, nobody ever taught like this before. It was awesome. You know, they're on. He gave them information or something worth talking about. And that's that group experience. But I deal with spatial dynamics, and then this is where you can actually coach them to combine reach lists. Okay, so say you have a class of 8 people, and you say, okay, I want you 4 to combine your reach list. I want you 4 to combine your reach list, and I want you to hold a small group at somebody's house. Call the people up on your list, learn how to give them a personal invitation, and say, I want you to come to this with me. They need the practice of doing it. They need to learn to fail and get up and do it again, because they're not going to get it right. But they need to do it, because there's some things about the Christian life that you're not going to learn by theory. You're going to learn by action, actually employing these things. And then when you come back to talk about it, you have that synergy. Oh man, I could have done this. You know, man, that was a great idea. I'm gonna use that the next time I do that. You put them in a community, a learning environment where they can grow together, and you're actually practicing all 4 of the spaces. So you can weave that in there. There's a lot of things that you can do here. Then you would give their assignments, and then review Principle 7, and then introduce Principle 8. Principle 8 is multiplying leaders. I'll give you a quick way to take all the fuzzy math out of multiplying leaders. And it's what I call stack and string. So stack and string. And so if you say, are you multiplying leaders? And you're like, I have no idea what you're talking about, then you can help someone get started. And it goes back to that reach list. So they look on that reach list and they say they've actually been, at this point, working with the people on that list. They've been praying for them. They've been doing good in their life. They've been swapping stories with them. They've been giving invitations. They've been in personal space, intimate space, social settings. You know, they've been working at this, so that they should have a working understanding of how this is unfolding. And then when they get into that group, that multiplication, then it's like this. So, Paul, if I meet with you and I say, Paul, let's go over some of the things that I'm learning, and I want you to begin to put into practice in your own life. And then we go over that. And now I'm going to say, now, Paul, who can you share this with? And you give me a name, and I'm going to write that name down. Now, Paul, when you go over this with, say, Vern, when you go over this with Vern, I want you to challenge Vern to do the same thing. Okay, make sure that you get the name of the person Vern is going to share this with. Stack. Now, Vern's going to be challenged to do the same thing, right? So you've got one stack. You've had one conversation. You've had one conversation, but that one stack might be 10 people deep. You know, as you learn how to do this, you deepen that. Now you string them together. Now I might go over to Harold and say, Harold, hey, you know, we're going to go over some stuff, and I'll have the same conversation. Harold, who are you going to share this with? I've had 2 conversations that might multiply into 20 conversations. That is what multiplying actually looks like. Stack and string. Now, how much time did I do that? How much time did I use to do that? I had 2 conversations. And I speak about this in conversations. I don't use any other language. I'll just say, hey, let's have a conversation about, you know, this, what I've learned in the Bible or whatever. I center around conversations because everybody's familiar with having a conversation, and they're usually not turned off by that. I don't say, hey, let's have a Bible study or this or that. I'll just say, let's have a conversation, even though the text will be guiding that conversation. So, but you have to find your own way in all that. So everybody understand the concept of multiplying leaders, take out the fuzzy math, stack and string, and you know what you can count? The names. If you can't count the names, it doesn't multiply, it happen. You're guessing. It's not guess. It's either you see the names or you don't. You know, it's really that. And every person has a name. So, all right. Same thing with this. And then you get to the midterm, and I like this, 1 week before exam, two days before exam. after it's finished. I don't know if you can see that. Very funny. All right. And then we get into now moving from, how do I operate to how do I help other people operate? And then we get into Jim Putman's book, Real Life Discipleship. And you can go through this as a springboard. Some of you are already doing your own type of church-wide thing. You can implement it here. Okay? And when you do, please share your syllabus with us so we can put that out there, because a lot of other people might want to do what you're doing. And the more influence and resources that we have, the better we're able to serve people. So that's what we want to do. But basically, here's he goes through setting the stage. Chapter 1 would be how do we create churches that succeed. Chapter 2, the invitation is the definition, and then that would be that week's lesson. I'm going to kind of click through here. You'd review and introduce. And so I've got it laid out for you so that you actually have the breakdown of the material. And then I don't have an assignment on these because it's not as clear. So you'd give the assignment on that. And if it's something that you wanted just to keep up with personal discipleship, you could do that too. However you want to do that, you have some leeway there. Let's see. On week 11, I'm going to skip through here because it's really just a breakdown of the chapters. And then we'll have goes to 15, I think. You can see it's neither one of these are really long, arduous reads. That's not the reason I picked these. It's because you have practical, actual assignments that you can do and judge by. Then you have the final exam. And then I want to show you here, at the end of this, they should create a master plan kind of for how they're going to do disciple making. If they're not in a church, if they were leading discipleship in a church, what would it look like? Knowing what you know now, what would it look like? And then you have them develop that plan, and that helps them see it from a holistic point of view. I do this personally, but I also have to lead other people to do this. How do I do it? You should help them be able to deliver a plan. Now, some of you already have a plan in place. And so what I would say about that is when you go through your plan, here, then integrate that into part of their paper. Integrate it there, because you don't want them to do something else. So let them do what you do. It's already working. And then I wanted to show you briefly, here's how you can lay out a 3-hour teaching time. So if you're not used to doing that, this is a way to do this, and I just broke this up into hours, 3 hours. So the first, I would do a 20-minute teaching time, and that can be however you do that. You can use videos, you can use lecture, you can use all those type of things. And then I would have some sort of activity that they actually start doing together. You could do a quiz, you could have them work, look up passages over, where else in the scripture, is mentioned love God, love people. And you give them an assignment to actually start looking at that. Or how many, what are some passages that deal with how you should keep your heart? And then get them really working on that. And so you would just work through here to your teaching activity. And 20-minute spurts are probably pretty solid. That's about all we can take. And then you have a break at the end. Now, the only caveat to this would be the review would be week 2. So in week 2, this first 20 minutes would be review and then a quiz over what you reviewed. And that way they've covered it probably 3 or 4 times. They ought to know it. By that time, they've heard you talk about it. They've read it. We reviewed it. Now you take the quiz. If they don't do good on their quiz, it's all your fault. So, no, but they've paid no attention whatsoever, for sure. But this is a way that you can break down that 3-hour class in a chunk that hopefully is helpful. So, you guys have any questions? Yeah.
between the two books, what would be the difference in the teaching between the real life and the discipleship?
Yeah. I think the way I would look at this is the Discipleship Uncomplicated deals with you personally. How do you actually go day to day and make disciples? In real life discipleship, it's going to deal with more as a church. Here's how we do it as a church. This is coming from a pastor's perspective in his local congregation. This is how we do it. And he's going to talk about, how they do curriculum and all of those type of things. I don't deal with any curriculum. I deal with just the relational formation. How do you actually get into relationships in a way to influence them? So if you want, and that's a good question, because what happens, you might get into a group where none of them have been discipled, and you recognize, I don't even want to spend much time on how to do this as a church until I then stretch out the other. You can take each one of, there's 2 sections in there. How to share your story can be 4 sessions. Also, dealing with space, that can be 4 sessions. So because you got to learn how to deal with those things. So you got to know who you're dealing with, and then adjust so that you're actually able to teach them. And that's what your role is in this, is to help them integrate this into everyday life. So you might have a sliding scale like 15 weeks. You might do 10 weeks personal and 5 weeks church. Or you might do it the other way. If you have they got this part figured out, you might shorten that and say, let's talk about our church strategy and really implement that. And so, but they're going to need both. They still need to do that. And we've all met people who, they're talking it, but you can't, there's not a story that goes with what they're talking about, in any recent type event, and so I think I just come back to that principle. You can't give what you don't have. You can't give what you don't have. Any other questions, thoughts?
And you're sharing those practical examples as well with us.
A lot of those are in the book. A lot of those that I shared with you are in the book. Some of them are like when you go back to, let's say, gathering people's names. One of the places where people don't know people's names is actually at church. Right? So we go to the same pew, we sit in the same places, and we know the same 5 people that sit around us. So what I did, I gave out a 3x5 card, and I just called it a 3x5 challenge. I want you to go to church with a 3x5 card, keep it in your Bible, and I want you to intentionally get to know somebody by name and write their name down. So that they actually start getting to know people at church. Because there's an assumption that because you gather together, you know people there, but you don't know them. And nobody's really making you know them. And safety is our enemy. Really, safety, us being safe is our enemy in terms of actually getting this work done. Because you got to actually go and say hello. Hey, I know I've seen you here before, but I wanted to make sure I remember your name. That in itself is a great end, and you write it down. And then, how did you guys, tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me a little bit about your story. And then you do what Vern mentioned earlier. They're going to share those details. You're going to write down the details that stick, and then you're going to think about them and where might they go. They might go on your list, right? You start praying for them and their family. And then you start teaching other people how to do that. But I think that 3x5 card, I don't share that in the book. The stack and string is not in the book. I did a podcast over each one of these sections, and I shared new information over every one of those. And I think you can find that on Salty Believer, the Salty Believer podcast with Brian Catherman. He's a graduate from Gateway Seminary, got his DMin, and he's up in Salt Lake City church planting, doing a fabulous job there. But you can go and there's new information that I shared in that podcast about each one of these sections. So you can have what's in the book, and you can also have what's on there. And I'm learning stuff all the time, like getting on my phone here. I think I shared this with Vern. I may have shared this with some other people. Y'all know how to use your phone to keep up with people? if you have an iPhone, I have a section called, app called Reminders on there. And so what I'll do is just hit Reminders. This is not in the book either, but, and then I'll hit just the plus, put in who and where, you know, who they are, what's their name. I always put where I met them, because if you meet them like at a Starbucks in some city, it might be different in the Starbucks in another. So I put kind of where I met them, and then I met, you know, what's one thing that I learned about them, or one thing that I remember about them. And then I hit the information button, and then it says, you've got options. I put remind me at location. I hit location, and then it says current location. I hit current location, and then when I arrive. Now, every time I arrive at that place, it's going to bring up their name. It's going to bring up what I know about them. And it's like a living prayer list, you know, everywhere you go. I shared this with a missionary in Mexico City, and he's like, Warren, man, my phone is just beeping everywhere I go. This is going off everywhere. I'm like, well, that's not a bad thing, you know, because then you're conscious. And for when I got into this, you know, I used to always harp and think, man, it's about being intentional. Being intentional. You got to be intentional, which is true. You got to be intentional. But here's a reality I never really thought of. You cannot be intentional about something you're not aware of. You know, awareness trumps intentionality. And I can't tell you how many opportunities I walked by because I was unaware that the opportunity even existed. I'll share one story about that. I was getting ready to share a message on a Sunday evening, and I was drinking a cup of coffee at a Starbucks, and this lady literally sit down right in front of me. I was at a table for two, and she sat down right in front of me. And she said, I noticed your Bible was open, and are you going to church? And I started having red flags go off. And I'm like, I am. I said, I'm going to share at church tonight. And she said, I would like to go. Can I go with you? You know, the red flags, you know, going up. And I'm like, you know what? I will try to get you there. If you're serious about going, I will get you there. And I said, where do you live? And she pointed across the street behind this building, staying at the hotel right over there. I didn't even know that hotel was there. Never saw it. I've been in that Starbucks a million times. Never even noticed it. And I said, you know what? Let me have your phone number, and I'll have somebody call you, and they will come pick you up. And I called my wife, and I said, this is what happened. You know, what I do. And then I thought, you know what? There's a person at the church I know. That's going to be a better deal. So I called the lady at the church I knew, and I said, here's the situation. I don't know if it'll materialize, but here's her name, here's her phone number, and here's where she lives. And so I get there, you know, and there she is. She is there in the audience that night. And she wanted to come to church. That's what she wanted. But then God reminded me of something. He said, Warren, how many other people at that hotel do you not know? And I'm like, wow, I didn't even know the hotel was there. I was like everybody there, right? And I'm thinking about her, and I'm thinking, you know, she's really a gateway there. She's a person I know. I wonder if she would be willing to have Bible study in her room, you know, and invite other people, because she knows other people. And you're just a couple questions away from making that happen, you know. But I couldn't be intentional about a situation I was not even aware of existed. And I've seen that play out many, many times. Another unique thing was a bus driver that I knew, and we talked about this a lot. He started a prayer meeting in his bus barn with bus drivers before they set out on their journey. And he's like, Warren, I never knew that we could do stuff like this. You know, I'm like, me neither. So that's pretty awesome. But you know, there's tons of ways to do this. And as you go and as you share with more people, you're going to get more and more insights about how to do this. Like I'm hanging on to that name, that book name thing for sure. And for those of you who may not know this, there's a website called etymology.com that will give you the background of any word, give you the historical root of any word, etymology.com. And so I like, that's always interesting to me as well. I'm like, I never really thought about it like that, but I'm going to. So anyway, all right. Well, any other questions, thoughts, ideas, anything you want to share along this? Yeah.
Yes, Doctor. I'm not good for names. I mean, I know. In fact, one of the things that I have learned lately is that most of the time we are not aware as a persons. We are not present in the time.
Yeah.
All of us, human beings by nature, unless you prepare yourself to do it. I have been in meetings where other pastors just right in front of me, and they don't even say hi.
Yeah.
And I know that they are not present.
Mm.
Fred Coleman calls it, they are in automatic pilot.
Right.
Mhm.
So this is Nicholas, right? Or John or Peter.
Mhm.
But Pastor Nicholas does the same thing.
Yeah.
And so many times I think we're in our churches, but we are not present. We are focused on the sermon that we're going to preach, the family that we're going to visit, and we are ahead probably 30 minutes, 2 hours, and we are not present.
Yeah.
And I have been in meetings where I expect to receive a hi from the person that I know, and it hurts.
Yeah.
I can imagine how the members of our churches feel when we do the same thing,
That's right.
because we are busy.
Right.
So I work for a financial company, and I deal with customers in my new position that I do have. So now on purpose, before I leave home, I spend some time in prayer and I say, Lord, allow me to be present on every single time when I deal with the people. And it makes a huge difference because I can see their faces,
Mhm.
smiles, sadness, worriness. So I'm trying to use it now at church.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know about this. I mean, I'm learning.
Right.
Like many things I'm learning. But I feel bad when I don't remember the name of somebody.
Yeah.
But now that I'm trying to be present in every time, every single moment, it's making changes in my life. So I'm gonna take all of what you have been sharing for the ministry,
Mhm.
but as well as a person.
Yeah.
Nicholas, not Pastor Nicholas.
Right. Yeah, that's a very good point. I think that, as sometimes when we try to compartmentalize our lives, like this is our church life, this is me at home, this is me in the, when I'm with this, that, there should be symmetry. That it should be the same person throughout that picture. And I agree with you. There's so many, pressure is a distractor in itself, and we all feel it. I felt it this morning trying to get ready, not fully knowing who all's going to show up, just hoping that it works out. I'm feeling all this, and I don't know if I can help from feeling that, but I can just recognize that, hey, I'm feeling this pressure. It's I heard it put this way, worry works. 90% of the things I worry about never happen. Right. That was supposed to be a joke. So, but it's kind of like one of those things, that you worry about stuff, and no matter what I worried about things, it never materialized here. We have a great group, everybody's wanting to learn and grow, and I'm looking forward to what God's going to do with this, and the people that He's going to work through you, and He's going to raise up, and they're going to raise up, and that's what it's meant to do. So I appreciate you sharing that, being present in the moment. When that moment is there, that you're not missing it, you're present. That's a good word. That's good. All right. Anything else? Any other thoughts? I went through the material pretty quick. I didn't want to spend a lot of time going through it as far as the mechanics, but the idea here today really is to say, here's how you can lay out a 15-week course and at least structure it. And then here's a way that you can do your 3-hour teaching time if you want to. And then you can adjust those things. You have freedom to do that. The main thing is that the students really get the material and what you're trying to infuse in them. That's really the main thing in all this. All right, we're gonna have time to break. I don't think that you guys are due back here until 10:30. And so if y'all have any questions personally or whatever, I'm here to try to be of help. And then you've got the break room, restrooms. If you need anything, just let me know. All right, you're free to go.
Thank you.
Thank you.